My name is Tayari Howard. I've spent 42 years in broadcasting, radio and television. I've worked for XHRM 92.5, which is now Magic 92.5. I spent 16 years there. I spent 4 years at Jam and Z90. Most of you have heard of that station. And I spent 16 years at Smooth Jazz 98.1, 2 years at San Diego City College, which is Jazz 88.3, and 2 years at KPBS FM 89.5, San Diego State University. All told, 42 years. My mother was one of the first black females in America on air and radio. She was a radio DJ, disc jockey. My father programmed Negro radio stations in the South, WLOU, Louisville, Kentucky. I'm the second generation. I have two daughters behind me, both in radio today. The youngest is 27 years old, on air in Denver, Colorado, which is an urban hip hop station. So the bottom line is, I want to talk to you this evening about what has happened over the last 50 years here in America's finest city, San Diego. No, I didn't come to San Diego until 1970. I was attached to the United States Coast Guard Air Station, which is right across from the airport. I flew in helicopters. I was an aviation survivalman. But I was attending night school and summer school, like some of you are right now, in broadcasting. I actually went to my first radio station at the age of 3. My mother used to take me to the radio station. I don't know why. I didn't have that dialogue with her. And I got a chance to see old style radio or old school radio versus mainstream and various different types of genres of music. Now, in the 1960s, coming into the awareness of African Americans and African American music, San Diego started taking off. The era of dashikis and black awareness, the era of black music started to really take hold in the 1960s and became very prominent in the 1970s. From the 70s, 80s, and 90s into disco music, as they called it, because they kept changing the genres or the genre titles on us, music in San Diego actually caught on. Due to the fact that we are about 150 miles away from another major metropolis by the name of Los Angeles, the two areas seemed to combine their music. I got involved at San Diego City College, which is now called Jazz 88.3 or Jazz 88, because it offered two things that most radio stations or most college campuses didn't offer here in San Diego. It offered a full study in the art of jazz. I'm talking about mainstream jazz, John Coltrane, Wes Montgomery, Pharoah Sanders, Thelonious Monk, George Benson's, the old style mainstream jazz. From that point, if you had that basis behind you, you could pretty much walk out of City College into San Diego State or any place else with a pretty good history of music under your collar. So I started at San Diego City College. From there, I went immediately into on-air operations. That means being on the air every night or every school night that I had an opportunity to attend. I would be on the air as a disc jockey. Now, feel free to raise your hand and ask questions as I go through this, because there's some lingo or some jargon or some slang or some vocabulary that comes along with that. Does anybody have an idea of where the term disc jockey came from or how far back it goes? Anybody have any idea? Anybody know what it means, disc jockey? Well, I'm going to tell you what it means. It's okay. It's okay.
I don't see it. I don't see the picture.
It'll work. It's good. Just snap. This is a platter or disc. This is actually an old school 12-inch record. One of my favorites.
How many youth have seen a record? Okay, just checking.
Thank you, Key.
Just checking.
I would have really felt bad if nobody raised their hand.
Just checking.
Okay, this happens to be a group that actually came to San Diego and delivered this record to me. This was Midnight Stars, No Parking on the Dance Floor, which was a hot cut at the time. I see some of the parents in the back room smiling already. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to date your age. This is called a disc. Before this, in the 1950s, they called them platters. But the disc was what the jockey, the person that's spinning the disc, and the two became disc jockey. And short, DJ. That's how this whole thing became, and it came up in the 1950s. It actually originated in the 1950s. So my mother, who was on air in the 1950s, this is a picture of my mother on air with her business card, was a disc jockey. So that's how the whole term started, where it originated. And back in those days, it was all about how fast you could talk, how fast you could read, how fast you could deliver the copy over the air. That made you hip. That made you cool. That made you in the swing of things. In San Diego in 1970, there was only one gentleman in San Diego that was attempting to start a radio station. His name was Chuck Johnson. This was an African American who was proficient in both radio and television. However, he used unorthodox means to advertise. He got an old station wagon, and he hooked up a bullhorn on top of the station wagon, and he would go around playing, here we go, 8-track tapes over the bullhorn. Does anybody know what an 8-track tape is? One? Okay, I'm sorry, but I have to give you this history. That was his idea of integrating radio and the audience to a radio station. Now, we all know that's not radio. That's actually riding around broadcasting something over a bullhorn. From that point, going into 1972, as I was attending San Diego City College, I auditioned for an X station. Now, I'm going to get into some jargon here. There are basically 3 types of stations broken down into 2 categories. There is an X station, there is a W station, and there is a K station. Now, here's what that means. Anything with an X call letter, XHTZ, XHRM, 91X, means that it originates from across the border in Tijuana. It is not an American station. Now, they may have facilities in America, thanks to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, but they're not American stations. So, Magic 92.5 is really XHRM broadcasting a 50,000 watt transmitter in Tijuana, Mexico. 91X and XHTZ, Jammin' Z 90.3, are originating out of Tijuana and are not American-made stations or American-owned stations. They lease their airwaves to American corporations who split the profits, with half of it going to America and the other half going back across the border. The primary reason for them to do that is because the value of the peso was lower than the value of the dollar, but the dollar's catching up with the peso. Okay? I know that was a little intricate, but that's how African Americans got involved in radio in the 1970s. The average price of an AM or FM radio station in San Diego County runs about $35 million. Very well overpriced. So back in the 1970s, it was around about 10 or 15 million. Most African Americans didn't have that kind of money, and if they did, they weren't planning on putting it into broadcast entities. So what they did was they went across the border and they formed a strategic alliance or relationship with owners of Mexican stations to be able to broadcast back over here on this side in America, to be able to have black music or African American music or R&B music, as we call it, rhythm and blues. Everybody understand that concept? So now they could compete adequately with a white-owned entity that was programming similar type of music, but for less money. Back to San Diego City College. I got a call one day while I was on the air at Jazz 88.3, And the call went something like this. Hi, this is Willie Morrow. You know, I've been cutting your hair when I had hair. I've been cutting your hair for about 5 years. And every time you come in the barbershop, you're always talking about radio and TV, radio and TV, radio and TV, radio and TV. Well, it's time for you to put up or shut up. We want you to come over to 92.5 and audition. Now, keep in mind, I was already on the air at KSDS, which is San Diego City College. Now, the difference between these two entities is this. City College, KSDS FM, is an educational facility. It's a college with a low-power FM transmitter, about 10 to 20,000 watts. It cannot compete with the commercials. So when you hear an educational station, you don't hear commercials. You hear sponsorships. When you listen to KPBS, San Diego State, you don't hear commercials. You hear, this show is being brought to you by a grant by the Ford Foundation. That's a sponsorship because they cannot compete, according to the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, with commercial grade radio. All right? So Mr. Willie Morrow gives me a call and he says, come to work for 92.5 as a disc jockey. We don't like that term, by the way. We shortened it to jock. So I decided to continue working at City College at night and take over a position at 92.5. Everybody follow me so far? Am I going too fast for anybody? Good. My first opportunity to get on the air was write a commercial. A client walked in the door and we had a brand new hamburger joint in San Diego open up in the 1970s called Fat Burger. Fat Burger was one of the greasiest, sloppiest, juiciest, cheesiest, smelliest hamburgers you've ever seen on the planet. But it was just downright delicious. You could not eat it with a straight face. You could not eat it without getting greasy. You could not eat it without getting dirty. So the client comes into the station. Mr. Morrow introduces the client to me. And he says, I want you to go to his restaurant and I want you to write a commercial. And we're going to evaluate the commercial as to whether or not we want you on the air. Everybody follow me so far? So I got on the phone. I called a friend of mine who was a female, and I said, I need you to go with me to this restaurant. So we go down to this restaurant called Fat Burgers, and they make me this hamburger. And the hamburger basically takes up the whole plate. Fries were put on a side plate. You didn't put the fries on the same plate with the fat. That's why they call it Fat Burger. Fat Burger took up the whole plate. It was the size of a steak. All right? So the fries is in a side plate and a soda for like 99 cents. I mean, it was a steal back then. $1.99, whatever it was. That's why they call it Fat Burger. Everybody was getting fat. Anyway, I took the Fat Burger and the fries and the Coke and took it back to the radio station. Everybody follow me? We went into a production booth. And I said, let's write a commercial. So we start writing a commercial. So the commercial is about me and this young lady who every week meet at Fat Burgers for a date at Fat Burgers. Now, the commercial is only 60 seconds. That's not a lot of time, right? You got 60 seconds to do this commercial. So in the whole commercial, she's complaining about we have to stop meeting here at Fat Burgers because we're meeting weekly and she's getting fatter. The whole time in the background, all you do is hear me eating. I'm actually eating. I'm eating the fries. I'm eating the hamburger on the air, and we're taping this. You got that? Finally, at the end, she says, did you hear anything that I said? And then she talks about the hours that Fat Burger is open. She talks about the menu that Fat Burger has. She talks about the fact that we got to quit meeting like this every week. Finally, I asked her, I says, do you have any fries to go with that shake? That's how the commercial ended. The commercial was so successful that I ended up getting the late night spot on the air at 92.5. And I remained there for 16 years. I know. all off of a Fatburger commercial. Who would have thought? The key to the the moral of the story is creativity. Creativity. That's the one thing that you bring to the table right now, today. And I'm going to give you some other elements as we continue to talk about my career in San Diego radio that you can use right now, today, to get yourself a broadcast career, or at least to become familiar with broadcasting. So, I'm at 92.5, right? I decided I got tired of doing jump up and down, knock down, drag out music. We were doing really good. We were the only black station in San Diego. There were approximately 35 stations in San Diego, including TV stations, and we were programming straight out soul music, R&B music, okay? Those 16 years afforded me the opportunity to work with some of these people. If you've heard of any of these people, raise your hand and keep your hand held up. I've worked with, in the industry, Luther Vandross, and keep your hands up. Anita Baker. I actually was the master of ceremonies for the last San Diego Marvin Gaye concert. Michael Jackson and Janet Jackson. Prince. Tupac Shakur. Snoop Dogg. Ice Cube. Earth, Wind and Fire. The Isley Brothers. Eddie Murphy. Barry White. Alicia Keys, Patti LaBelle, Kenny G, and the late Maya Angelou. I think everybody's hands is up, right? You put your hands down. Now, you probably have, well, how in the world did you, a disc jockey, work with all those people? And if you look closely around me, you'll notice some gold and platinum records behind me that I brought in. I couldn't bring them all in. I drive a Volvo and I just couldn't get them all packed in. So I actually brought one from Janet Jackson. This is her Rhythm Nation CD. It sold 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million copies of this album and cassette. If you look real close, it says Tayari Howard on it. Now, why is that? Here's the reason why. I was one of the only radio personalities or DJs in San Diego County to write, produce, and sell his own show on the air. And what that meant was, back in that time, remember the stores we had like Licorice Pizza, Tower Records, Warehouse Records? Anybody remember those? No? Okay, I forgot. There used to be some stores in San Diego that sold records that you could go to and buy records. Okay, thank God to Napster, all of that got wiped out with iTunes and all of that. So now you have to go order all your favorite songs over Amazon.com or iTunes. Am I correct? All right, I'm trying to balance so that I don't get too old and too young here. So somewhere at 92.5, I went to Willie Moore and I said, I'm tired of doing the same old thing night after night. Now, one of the things that caused me to become tired was I had to go across the border every night, 6 nights a week. The radio station at that time was not located in San Diego. So we had to drive to Tijuana, go up on the top of the hill to the tower to be able to go into the station to broadcast live. That took a significant wear and tear on our automobiles, on our energy, on our enthusiasm, but we had such passion to be in this business that we would give anything to be in radio. Some of you have that passion. So, for 16 years, I drove across the border 6 nights a week to be in radio. Actually, 10 of those 16 years. Finally, with the North American Free Trade Agreement, which came along, I can't remember when it came along, I think in the 90s, 92.5 put up a microwave dish antenna here in San Diego, California, and they beamed from the signal in Tijuana to the microwave antenna, and now you get it over here. But you got it over here all along anyway, okay? So that's the advent of technology coming into this thing. So the boss, my boss at that time, he was the president, he said, look, what do you got in mind? I said, I'd like to write and produce my own show. And he said, okay. He says, what kind of show do you want to do? I said, well, everybody's playing up-tempo cha-cha music. I said, I think we should go back and do what they're doing on the East Coast. I was familiar with what was going on in Washington, D.C. at Howard University, what was happening at Chicago. I came out of Chicago, Illinois. And they were all programming night music called The Quiet Storm. The Quiet Storm was a collection of ballads, nothing but ballads. The slang for it was baby-making music. So Dr. Morrow looked at me and he says, so you want to do baby-making music? I says, no, I want to do ballads. And he says, it's still baby-making music. He says, okay, I tell you what, let's give you a show. You do it. You come on the air at 6 o'clock. I was on the air at 6 o'clock every evening. And he says at 8 o'clock, you switch from the regular music and go into Music for Lovers. I named the show Music for Lovers. So that was the creation of my own show. As a result of me creating my own show, the record companies and the record shops would have to call me and ask me, how many times are you playing Janet Jackson? How many times are you playing Freddie Jackson? How many times are you playing Luther Vandross? How many times are you playing the Isley Brothers? And I'd have to keep a chart telling them how many times I was playing all this music. At the time, I didn't know why I had to keep these stats, okay? But it was necessary for the record companies because they were tracking every sale of every record in San Diego. Now, they do this all across the country. It wasn't just San Diego. They track record sales, Chicago, even in small places. But the end result is, by tracking all of those songs, this is how an artist, songwriter, publisher, record label gets millions of gold and platinum records. Then what they would do back then, as you can see, this says 1983. In the 1980s, they said, well, look, if we find a DJ, disc jockey, or a radio personality that actually has his or her own show, we should be giving them gold records and platinum records too, because they get to control their own music. And that's kind of very rare, all right? So the record labels started showing up at the radio stations with these for the top disc jockey that was writing and producing their own show. So what's the moral of that little brief story right there is, if you're really good in this business, you not only get on the air as a disc jockey or a personality or an announcer, you could be writing and producing your own show, which means you get to call the shots and select the music that you think the audience wants to hear. How does that sound? So, my stock went up. I started getting a few more brownie points. I was now selling music, writing the show, producing the show, and voicing the show, and writing commercials. Now, anybody have an idea of what kind of money a announcer or disc jockey makes starting off in San Diego? Off the top of your head, what do you think? A couple hundred per day, month? You're way too high. She's way too high. She said a couple $100 a month, right? Okay. Way too high. He said way too high. He said, the average is $10 an hour to start. I know, this is not becoming interesting now all of a sudden, huh? All right. What do you think a person makes for writing, producing, and selling his or her own show? Let's start out at $80,000 a year. Is that a better? Is that?
Yes.
Much better? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
What year?
Oh, this is back in 1980s. I'm now in 1980. I've progressed from 1972 at KKSD Jazz, going to night school, 92.5. I started in 92.5, just before Willie Morrow. It was called 92 Star 5. We were working for free then. It wasn't until Dr. Morrow came along in 1980 that we started making money. We actually started getting a paycheck that we could see with our names on it. That makes sense? So by 1983, I was working 2 full-time jobs. We won't talk about the day job. That's another story. But at night, I was on the air every night, Monday through Saturday, from 6 p.m. to midnight, at about $85,000 a year. That included endorsements, and no, I don't mean like Air Jordans. Okay, I mean endorsements from Fat Burger commercials and anything else that I could write or produce. Make sense? Now, in 1989, a violent storm struck in Tijuana and struck the tower at 92.5 and snapped it in half. Some of the parents might remember what happened then. I don't expect you to remember that. But as a result of the tower snapping in that storm, 92.5 went off the air. And it lost approximately 75% of its broadcast audience because Americans couldn't go across the border and just put up a tower because that would violate the Mexican workers. And the Mexican workers didn't want us to come across and put the tower up too fast because that would keep them from making any money. So the slower or the longer it took to get the tower up, the Mexicans could make more money. Make sense? So, Mr. Morrow got out of the business of broadcasting in 1989. I left and went to another station with an X call letter called XHTZ. 90.3 Jammin' Z90. Everybody heard of that station? Okay. I took Music for Lovers with me. I worked there from 1990 to 1994. But I changed the name of Music for Lovers to Night Moods. And so every night at a certain time, we would go into a theme song, sung by a lady by the name of Shaka Khan. She sings a song called Night Moods. That would be the theme song that would let the audience know that we're getting ready to transition to baby-making music. I'm sorry, to ballad music, okay? So, an interesting thing happened while I was at Jammin' Z90. Am I allowed to walk around, Key? Thank you. At that time, I was married. And I had a boisterous 10-year-old daughter by the name of Summer. I came home one day. We were living in Del Cerro. And my daughter was singing this song. And she had the lyrics to this song down better than I could deliver it over the radio. She knew it left and right, upside down, inside out, around the corner, all over. But the song was not a good song. So imagine, if you will, this conversation in the kitchen. My wife is there, Summer's there, and I'm there, and she's singing this song. And I said, hold it, time up. Summer, you cannot sing that song. Matter of fact, you're not allowed to sing that song. I no longer want to hear you repeat that song in the house. I don't want to hear you sing that song around your homies. I don't want to hear you associate that song with your posse. I don't want to ever hear that song come out of your mouth. And if I do hear that song, I'm not going to do the bar of soap in your mouth. All right? Everybody follow me so far? So then my daughter looks over at my wife at the time, and my wife had this incredible way of being able to make one eyebrow go up and the other one stay completely flat. I don't know how women do that, but she could lift the left eyebrow up, and it would always say, "You don't realize what you just said." That's what that look meant. So finally, my daughter looks over at her, and she sees that look, which gives her permission to speak, and she says, "Dad, how can you forbid me to sing the song? You just got off the air playing the song, talking about how hot it was." Brain freeze.
Tayari.